Why was Gideon afraid of seeing the angel of the Lord face to face? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Judges on Walking Through the Bible. Today we're going to be discussing Judges 6 verses 19 to 27, but before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Judges 6 verse 19, but if you don't have a Bible, don't worry, just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So Judges chapter 6, beginning at verse 19. So Gideon went in and prepared a young goat and unleavened bread from an ephah of flour. The meat he put in a basket, and he put the broth in a pot, and he brought them out to him under the terebinth tree and presented them. The angel of the Lord said to him, "Take the meat and the unleavened bread and lay them on this rock and pour out the broth." And he did so. Then the angel of the Lord put out the end of the staff that was in his hand, and touched the meat and the unleavened bread. And fire rose out of the rock, and consumed the meat and the unleavened bread. And the angel of the Lord departed out of his sight. Now Gideon perceived that he was the angel of the Lord. So Gideon said, "Alas, O Lord God, for I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." And the Lord said to him, "Peace be with you, do not fear, you shall not die." So Gideon built an altar there to the Lord, and called it, "The Lord is Peace." To this day it is still an Ophrah of the Abiezrites. Now it came to pass the same night, the Lord said to him, "Take your father's young bull, the second bull of 7 years old, and tear down the altar of Baal that your father has, and cut down the wooden image that is beside it, and build an altar to the Lord your God on top of this rock in the proper arrangement, and take the second bull, and offer a burnt sacrifice with the wood of the image which you shall cut down." So Gideon took 10 men among his servants, and did as the Lord had said to him. But because he feared his father's household, and the men of the city too much to do it by day, he did it by night. In our last lesson, we began to look at Israel's 5th judge, a man by the name of Gideon. We noted that Gideon's judgeship would have coincided with Deborah's judgeship due to a variety of factors, not the least of which is the similar condition of Israel. No, not the fact that they had gone off into idolatry, but the fact that in both cases male leadership was lacking, and Israel's total fear of the enemy caused them to go into hiding. While Deborah had to deliver Israel from the Canaanites, it was going to be Gideon's task to deliver Israel from the Midianites, who had been attacking Israel constantly and destroying their crops. When God finds Gideon, Gideon is threshing out wheat in a wine press so that the Midianites wouldn't find out and destroy the food. God tells Gideon that he is with him and would use him as a man of valor to deliver Israel from the Midianites. Gideon is skeptical, for he doesn't understand how God could be with him, seeing all the calamity that has befallen Israel. Where were the miracles that their fathers spoke of God doing for Israel in Egypt? Why is there such suffering? Such is the attitude of some today who look out at a world filled with disease, pestilence, and death, and wonder how there could be a God who would allow things like this to happen. But the answer for us is the same one that God could have given Gideon had he wanted to. Israel was suffering because of sin. God doesn't desire calamity to befall his creation, but because of sin, calamity does. That's why the salvation offered by God is one that we should desire and grasp for. God told Gideon that he would, in fact, be with him through this. Gideon was still not convinced, and so asked God for a sign that this was so. He desired the Lord to remain where he was until Gideon went out and got a sacrifice for him and presented it to him. The Lord agreed, which brings us down to verse 19. Gideon's sacrifice consisted of a prepared young goat and some unleavened bread, elements of sacrifices that we might recognize from Leviticus, though these weren't sacrifices that were going to be offered at the tabernacle. Gideon put the meat in a basket and the broth in a pot and came and presented this to the Lord. God was not going to eat this sacrifice, though, but he was going to allow it to be offered. He told Gideon to take the meat and bread and place it on the rock and pour out the broth, which would sort of act like a drink offering. Gideon did this, and then the Lord stretched out his staff and with the end touched the meat and unleavened bread, and immediately fire rose out of the rock and consumed the meat and the bread. The angel of the Lord then departed out of Gideon's sight. Now up until this point, We weren't sure whether Gideon knew that he was speaking directly to the Lord or to simply an angel sent from the Lord. But verse 22 leaves us with no doubt that at least at this point, Gideon knew that he had been speaking directly to God. Fear washed over him because he had seen the Lord face to face. Why would this have troubled Gideon? Because Exodus 33 verse 20 says, "But he said, 'You cannot see my face, for no man shall see me and live.'" In that context, Moses is asking to see the glory of God. In other words, God in his spiritual form, which is why God said that nobody could see his face and live. However, here in Judges 6, just as it was when the Lord appeared to Hagar in Genesis 16, and when the Lord appeared to Abraham in Genesis 18, he took on the form of a man so that we could behold his face. Jesus did the exact same thing when he came to this earth in the Gospels. The Hebrews, though, had this idea that if you saw God in any form, you would die. So God had to comfort Gideon by telling him that he should go in peace, for he would not die. Because of this, Gideon set up an altar to the Lord and called it "The Lord is Peace." This is another instance where our English translation obscures what the Hebrew would say, for in Hebrew it is named Jehovah Shalom, which of course means God is peace. He is peace to Gideon, for he didn't kill Gideon that day. That Gideon set up an altar here does show us how things have changed in Israel over the past 200 years. If you recall back to our study of Joshua, the 2.5 eastern tribes before crossing over the Jordan set up an altar that was a replica of the one in Shiloh as a sign to the 9.5 western tribes that these 2.5 eastern tribes were still part of the congregation of Israel. Until that was known, this action almost started a war. But by Gideon's day, altars besides the one in Shiloh was commonplace. Now, I'm not going to judge Gideon's altar here, for as long as unauthorized sacrifice wasn't offered on it, having a memorial for what God did for Gideon was not inherently wrong. However, with Israel's current idolatrous state, it probably wouldn't have been wise. God, though, wasn't going to leave Gideon for long, for that evening God told Gideon to take his father's young bull, the second bull of 7 years old, and go tear down the altar of Baal that his father had erected. He was also to cut down the image beside it and build an altar to God on top of that rock and offer the bull as a burnt sacrifice with the wood of the image that was cut down. Now, unlike the altar that Gideon built, this altar was commanded by God directly, so there would be nothing wrong with building and offering sacrifices on it, at least on this occasion, for God told Gideon to do so. And Gideon, of course, did this. But again, we see his fear still present in him. For even though the Lord was with him, Gideon feared his father's household and the men of the city. So he, along with 10 men of his servants, tore down the altar and the image at night instead of during the day. We'll continue our discussion of Gideon, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Judges chapter 6, verses 28 to 32. We continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time.
Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.